And he said, it's just a life. Like at some point, you just have to make a decision and do something.
Right.
And we so often today we see young people that become apoplectic, paralyzed because they can't make a decision. So they make no decision.
Yes.
So rather than just choose one thing and do it well, they choose nothing.
Yes.
And we see that too with discernment.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Crab on the Cross podcast. I'm your host, Mary Rose, and today I'm sharing with you my conversation with Father Matt Fish. This interview was really exciting because it was the first in-person interview I've done for the podcast. It makes such a difference to be able to sit across from somebody in the same room and just talk face to face. I really enjoyed the conversation I had with Father Matt Fish. We talked about discernment and making decisions, and then we got into some deeper theological territory about the mystery of God's will and divine providence, and we touched on the problem of evil. And so I think there's a lot in this conversation for people to take away. If you want to share your feedback, I would love to hear from you. You can do so by rating and reviewing an Apple Podcasts or Spotify. You can leave a comment on my YouTube channel or on my Instagram. You can tweet at me at crabandthecross. You can even send me an email at thecrabandthecross@gmail.com. Or if you're one of my many friends who is listening, you can just send me a text. I am really enjoying hearing everybody's feedback on the podcast and what episodes you enjoy. If you're an Instagram person, I also like to conduct polls in my Instagram stories and just generate feedback that way. So definitely follow me at The Crab and the Cross. And now, my conversation with Father Matt Fish. Father Matt Fish is a graduate of Franciscan University of Steubenville. He taught theology and English before entering seminary in the Archdiocese of Washington, where he has been a priest for the past 7 years. Father, thank you so much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
We were getting into your bio a little bit before the interview started, and I didn't realize you were from all the way on the West Coast, Seattle.
West Coast, best coast, baby.
That is a lie, but I also haven't been to the West Coast to verify it. So
yeah, all that humidity we had this last week that was torturing everyone. Imagine that not being present at all.
Well, isn't it very rainy in Seattle?
That's what we tried telling all the Californians to keep them from moving up there, and it failed.
I see.
So the weather's actually perfect in Seattle in the summertime. It's really a two-season climate. You've got a winter that's cool and mild with a kind of Irish persistent light rain.
Okay.
From October through May. And then June through September, it's just doesn't rain. It's 70s into the low 80s. The weather's perfect. That's when everyone comes out and spends the whole time outside.
That's nice.
Yeah, so it's as long as you can handle the persistent light rain.
Yeah.
Growing up, I never saw an umbrella. When I went to college, what are these things that people have like over their heads that kind of fan? It's so strange. We had jackets. You put on a rain jacket and you do what you were going to do if it wasn't raining, like going hiking. Oh, it's raining, no big deal. You just put on a jacket.
Right.
So it's a little different here when it rains in Maryland. You lock the doors and barricade everything, and it destroys buildings and roads. And that's very rare in the Northwest to have that kind of summertime rain.
Right. Oh yeah. It's like monsoon season here in the summer sometimes. Yep. I've been putting a patio into my backyard, and so we've had to dig out.
Oh man!
And only like 8 inches, but between the rain we've gotten this past month,
probably been a river the entire
summer.
summer.
Yeah. I had someone from HOA call me, and they were like, "Hey, are you putting a swimming?" This is a genuine question. Are you putting a swimming pool in? I was like, "Well, that wasn't my plan, but right now it is a swimming pool."
Actually, It's just a fish farm.
Right.
We're not licensed yet, but we think we're gonna do pretty well.
Yeah. Why not? So then, what brought you over to the DC area?
So I was living in Illinois, and I was working out there. I had followed a girlfriend out there, and we broke up, and I was in Peoria, and I'm not from Peoria. So that's like the worst case scenario for a guy in his 20s from the West Coast. Like, what am I doing in Illinois in the wintertime?
Right.
After, a failed relationship. And so I had to get out of there. And my brother had actually moved out here to the DC area. He's a police officer in Virginia. Oh, wow. And I had a lot of friends out here from college. And I had taught high school for a number of years and had a graduate degree. So wanted to keep teaching. And applied to a number of places, and eventually it was Bishop O'Connell and DeMatha were giving me the best offers, and I decided to go with DeMatha. So if I had gone with Bishop O'Connell, maybe I would have ended up becoming a priest for Diocese of Arlington. It's fine.
Oh, that's right. They're in Virginia. Yeah.
But DeMatha was the one that had the best offer, and I felt the most at peace about. I taught there for a year, had a great experience. It's a real special place. And on my heart, throughout my, really my whole life, but especially in my 20s, and at that point, I was really thinking, okay, do I want to do this priesthood thing? And I need to give this one last shot if it's going to happen. So I contacted the vocation. Well, I went to a few vocation events and met some great guys, was really impressed by the priests who spoke and the other seminarians who spoke and the guys who were interested. Went on a retreat, and it was just a powerful experience of just invitation, really, from the Lord to say, okay, you don't have to be sure, but you can't discern anymore here outside of seminary. If you really want to find out, you've got to enter seminary, and that's the place where you're going to be able to test this call. So I entered, and they sent me to theological college for my first 2 years. I had a great experience there, and met some great guys, some lifelong friendships, really. First year is always tough in seminary as you're kind of working out. Just a lot of, attachments to the world, ways of thinking, whatever, making sure you don't, check your ex-girlfriend's Facebook page, things like that. I'm not on Facebook anymore. That was, that's one of those things you learn early on in seminary. This is now social media. And by the end of that year, it was a challenging year. And actually, my first summer assignment as a seminarian was at St. Peter's in Waldorf.
Oh, okay.
And I had a great summer there with Monsignor Bill Parent. About halfway through the summer, my ex-girlfriend, who I had talked to after that retreat before I decided to enter, and told her that I think I'm supposed to be entering seminary, and she said, she didn't necessarily.
Wait, is this the ex-girlfriend from Illinois who dumped you in the middle of the Midwest?
It's true, and she's a wonderful person, and I hope she's never going to hear this, but she really is. But and I was not always the best to her, she thought maybe that we should, or that I should. Still give this a chance, the relationship, but I said, no, I think I'm supposed to enter seminary. And so she said, okay. And didn't talk to her again until the next summer when she called to tell me she was engaged.
Wow.
It was kind of like this punch.
Oh my gosh.
Was it 13, maybe 16 months later. And for those, a couple days afterwards, a lot of guys will go through an experience like this where something from your life before seminary comes back in a strong way. And it's like, was this the right decision I made? Giving this up, and I'm not sure if I'm ready to give this up. But those 2 days it was a lot of prayer, and it was tough, but I realized how much growth had happened in my life, and the good things that were happening because of the rule of life I was living in seminary and drawing closer to the Lord, and the experiences of school and different types of ministry that we were doing. I said, you know what? This has been a really good year, even if a challenging one, and I'm ready to go back for year 2. And I kind of never looked back.
Wow. Okay.
And from that point on, the Lord just gave me a grace of real peace and confirmation, and it got stronger as I got closer to ordination. So after 2 years at Theological College, Catholic University, I went to Rome, and I was there for the next 5 years. I was ordained in 2015. I had a great experience there. Priest now for 7 years.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's interesting to me because I always wonder, because I've talked to some priests and they have known that they were supposed to be priests or called to be a priest from the time they were a child, and it was just a straight shot, high school seminary to college seminary to, ordination basically. But that's interesting that for you it was a bit more of a windy path. Were you raised Catholic? Were you always in a strong Catholic family? Did you ever fall away?
I was raised Catholic in a good Catholic family. My parents always practiced their faith, and real examples of living that faith to me. There's 3 of us in my family, and we're actually all still practicing the faith, the kids, which is great.
Nice.
And a lot of that is because of my parents. And but I think God gives people different graces, of course, but even when you say I've always known, you don't really know, it's always this belief.
That's a good point.
And I think, aside from maybe exceptional examples of saints or other people, the reason I say there's a belief is that there comes a point where you have to make a move without total certainty.
Yes.
And entrust yourself to the goodness of the Lord, to his providence, and say, this decision I make, it's like I read something in the stars, it's my fate, and I don't have a choice, so I guess I have to do this, because there's not a lot of merit or opportunity for love there.
Wow, yeah.
When you're not totally sure, I mean, you have signs, you have confirmations, you're inclined, okay, but at some point, if it's going to be a gift and an offering and a sacrifice, there can't be this certainty of necessity. There has to be the freedom to say, this is something I want to give. This is a gift of my life, and I'm doing this because of love, because I love God, because I love the church, and that, however big that step is, there's a risk you take, because you don't know. You can't be sure in that way. You know that God is good. You know that he's led you your whole life. You know that by his providence, you've been brought to this point, and you should trust that providence. But you can always come up with counterfactuals and what ifs. Right. And whatever that space is, I think the greater your willingness to say, I trust the Lord and his providence that brought me here, and I'm going to make this offer to myself, and this is a good thing. This is a great thing to do. And if God doesn't want me here, he'll show me. And when you get to that final point of making the commitment, and I think it's the same with marriage, you're never going to be 100% sure, and that's actually the beauty of it. You can make that gift in belief that, it's something that you want to do.
Right. Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does. No, and I struggled with that a lot myself. Like in college, especially, I was trying to discern like religious life. But I was very anxious about it. And I would go on these retreats, and I knew, like, I didn't have a lot of, I guess, guidance in the discernment department, but I knew, like, okay, you're supposed to feel peace, like, if it's where God wants you to be. But then I would go on these retreats, and I was so afraid that, like, God was just going to speak in this very, like, boom, audible way, like, you're called to be a nun, that I would have, like, these panic attacks on these retreats. And it was actually really traumatic in a way. And it wasn't anybody imposing anything on me, but it was just like my own kind of psyche and like anxiety about, like, I don't know, like I'm 19 years old and I'm trying to make like a decision for the rest of my life, and that's like really, really like terrifying. And I wasn't really I wasn't really familiar with the way that God speaks, if that makes sense. Like when I was first coming into my faith, like in a very strong way, like kind of senior year of high school going to college, like I was almost afraid that I was going to have like a mystical experience, like a vision or something. And I was like, I don't know if I want that. I'm not ready for that. But that was like, that's all I'd read about in the saints, was it was always these super dramatic things. And it wasn't, you don't see as many examples of like that kind of slow, gentle, guidance.
And I think that's probably says more about, I think a lot of us have that experience. I think it says more about us than those saints. I think it's the way often we're reading the experience of those saints through our modern or contemporary lens that is full of anxiety. And that is, one of the characteristic features of our age, where in previous times it was, if you just think about marriage this way, don't even talk about a religious vocation, talk about something that's natural. Marriage was just what you did. Right. And it doesn't mean that people didn't have any anxiety about it, but it was seen as this normal thing that, of course, at some point you would want to have a family and you would get married and you'd make the best choice that was available to you. But I think today there's this condition that we have that we're always imagining how maybe this isn't the right choice, and for all these kind of crazy reasons, it's not going to go right, and I'm making the wrong choice, and what if this and what if that, and they're like at Steubenville, people would do this, and it became, I think, a kind of problem you see in a lot of stronger Catholic places. This like hyper anxiety about discerning the vocation, the idea that God is this kind of trickster up there in heaven who's laying all these signs. Maybe they're real signs, maybe they're fake signs, and you have to be this detective that's constantly testing these signs. Like, I don't know, is this really a sign? Can I trust my feelings? Do I have this feeling? Do I have that feeling? And I think at a certain point, for me, actually really helped was to move away from that more feeling-based model of discernment to that one that was more reason-based.
Yeah.
I think I got that a lot from the influence of the Dominicans that, I went to graduate school at Dominican schools. And it's not that feelings don't matter and that they're not a factor in that discernment process, but so is the mind.
Right.
And that's probably the most important factor. And we should be able to see something as good and say, this is a good thing, I can do it, and so I'm going to choose it. And I remember Monsignor James Shea, who's one of my favorite priests, is the president of University of Mary. Awesome guy. He talked to us about this one time. I was in a class with him, and he said, it's just a life. Like at some point, you just have to make a decision and do something.
Right.
And we so often today we see young people that become apoplectic, paralyzed because they can't make a decision. So they make no decision.
Yes.
So rather than just choose one thing and do it well, they choose nothing.
Yes.
And we see that too with discernment, that people could say, well, they're in this great relationship with someone, and the other person's Catholic, and everyone else would say like, yeah, you found this great Catholic person, get married. I don't know. I mean, I'm just not sure if this is the right choice. What if God is calling me to religious life? What if he's calling me to priesthood? What if this person, what if? And again, I think that says more about us today and why are we so unable to trust that the ordinary parts of our life that we would use to make decisions aren't trustworthy, aren't good enough to make a decision. So, just nature, reason, whatever. Why does it have to become this game of criticizing and testing these signs, and it's a mystery and a secret, and you've got to be a detective.
Right.
And I don't see that in the writings of the saints. I don't see that as a feature when you read literature, before recent times. People would get anxious about things, but I think choosing a state of life was not really something that was a part of it.
Right.
And even like the examples you think of, like Teresa of Avila didn't really want to be a sister. And, in the beginning, and she kind of forced herself to do it. She writes about this. And later on she says that, yeah, that was okay. Like I recognized that this was a better thing in her language. And so I kind of made myself do it. And a lot of people today would say that's like the worst. I mean, absolutely not. If someone, you should feel positive feelings, inclined to something. If you have any kind of negative feelings, it's a sign not to do it. I don't know. I mean, feelings are like complex things, and they can come from a lot of different places, and they change, and you go through phases and stages. And but the truth of the goodness of a vocation is something that doesn't change. And marriage is always a good thing. And if you can do it, if you're able to do it, and you want to do it for the right reasons, and you believe in a God that's been leading you your whole life, who's maximally provident, right? And who isn't like watching from a distance and occasionally throwing out these signs, some of which are fake, some are real, but rather is moving and guiding all things. I think the ordinary way of discernment is I shouldn't have to have this presumption of doubt. I shouldn't have to test things as if it's all a bunch of tricks. If my life seems to be going in this direction and it's a good thing and people around me are affirming this, then do it. Right. And yeah, there may be moments of kind of exceptional discernment that's needed, but I'm not convinced that a state of life is typically one of those moments, choosing a state of life.
Yeah. No, the best advice I ever got from a sister is she said that God is pure act and grace comes when we act. And so you have to act. You have to make a decision. And if it's the quote unquote wrong decision, like God can step in and redirect you. But if you're paralyzed by the thought of making the wrong decision, and so you just don't make a decision, like you almost don't leave the space for God to like bring his grace into that act.
Yeah. And I'd probably take it even a step like higher or beyond that to say, I think this is the more Thomistic perspective that even our actions, even our thoughts, even the things that we're doing, those too are part of God's action. And so
we got to get into this. This is a big topic.
Because otherwise you're really moving toward a deist discussion where like God is potency, and he waits for us to act. But as soon as you think about it, like, well, that's a very problematic metaphysic.
Okay.
If God's pure act, like if we are acting because we share or participate in some way in the fullness of actuality. Now that's very esoteric, whatever. I mean, to break it down to like real life, God's always acting. He's never waiting. He's never like pausing for us to do. He doesn't just know what we're doing like we did it and he saw it in the future. He's the one who did it more than we did, which is mysterious and hard to understand, but metaphysically necessary as a requirement, because otherwise we ourselves become prime movers. And we're not. And we receive our being, we receive our actuality from the one who doesn't just give it and walk away and see what happens, who's at every moment maximally involved in moving and guiding all things, naturally and supernaturally. So I don't think this is wrong. Like, we'll speak about an amazing grace, God who moved first. Like, I wasn't interested in God at all. I was lost. I was gone. I didn't start to figure it out. And then God was like, okay, this person's figuring it out, so I guess I should give them some grace. Like, that's semi-Pelagian, we would say. Like, oftentimes people have this experience. I wasn't looking for God at all, and he came into my life, and it was him, not me.
Absolutely.
Now, we know and we believe as Catholics that God doesn't just give us grace so that we can be passive instruments. He moves so that we can also move, right? So we believe that we're saved not just by this faith that comes from grace, but also the grace that makes possible our action, our good works. So St. Thomas talks about operative and cooperative grace. Both are from God, right? Operative grace is when God acts and we don't. And this can happen all the time, right? But usually it happens certain significant moments where God moves to bring us into a state or to begin our action, naturally, supernaturally, whatever. And the cooperative grace is the grace that we also need to do anything supernaturally, but also involves our freedom. But I think you have to be careful if you paint a picture of grace is like the fruit on the tree. And if only I could get my crap together and reach up and grab that fruit, then my life would be okay. Because God's grace is already acting. And yes, he wants us to move and to act and cooperate, but it's not because he's not already involved in that. And it's, at the end of the day, what you don't want to fall into is this kind of, competitive analysis where either God moves or I move. Right? God is a transcendent cause. So he's in no way a competitive cause. He's not a cause like any cause in the universe at all.
Right.
He is the first cause, which doesn't mean like he hits the dominoes and then they all kind of go. At every time and at every place, God is always maximally involved. And some of that involvement is he creates a universe of free creatures who act freely. There's real contingency. Things aren't necessary. But to get to the point where, and you see this in discernment, like I'm waiting for God to act, and I guess he hasn't acted. So like God's always acting. Like and discernment is looking at your life and how is he speaking already?
Right.
And then having the trust and the confidence that if I act in good faith, if I follow God's will, if I'm seeking what's good, he's going to continue to support me as he has supported me in the past.
Right.
It's God. He's good. He wants my ultimate happiness, right? He's been there all along. And that should make us less anxious. That should make us, right, more at peace to say, I don't have to worry that I'm going to get in the way of divine providence, because it's impossible. I mean, this is a really profound, amazing spiritual point. Like I'll say this a lot in confession, I'm talking to people, that one day when you get to heaven and you see not just your whole life, but the entire universe, right, after the final judgment, universal judgment, Christ reveals all things, you're not going to say, great job, Lord. I mean, it was really like pretty awesome. But, might I suggest you tweak this a little bit, or it would have been a better universe had you done that. It's impossible from that perspective that we'll be able to say to God, you could have done a better job.
Sure.
Now, God, like St. Thomas talks about this, God could always create a different universe with different parts and whatever. But given the universe he's created with all the parts in it, right, parts taken very kind of generally, it's not possible that you could improve upon his order. Like God orders the universe perfectly, right? For if this is the universe he's created, and it is, it's impossible when you get to heaven that you're going to be able to go tell God, my life was pretty good, but I think it could have been better, which is really amazing because people can struggle with regret, a certain kind of regret that says my life should have been different. And it doesn't mean that it couldn't have been different in the sense of there wasn't real contingency. You could have made different choices, whatever. But God's providence works through that. And in the end, how our life works out in the mystery of God's providence, how he uses that as part of his plan to make this new creation, to recapitulate all things in his son, we will not be able to improve upon that plan personally or generally, which is incredible, because that means you can have this trust and this gratitude that in the end of the day, like, it's for the best. And that's a mystery, because it brings in quite all these like big questions, like, well, what about people who go to hell, right? Was that for the best, right? Or were they predestined to be damned? I mean, all these things that theologians have wrestled with. But you cannot say that God did like a 85% job at the end. Like, he got a B. But
right.
he could, would have been nicer if he had an A-. But my life had turned out differently. But God did the best he could. No.
Well, okay, but can't you say that, like, God, he made, as we know he did, he made this perfect world. But we, through our own free choices, have done things to screw it up. It's as though he made this masterpiece and we've thrown acid on it, right? I mean, isn't that true?
Yeah. So and this is what we couldn't have known without his revelation, that God allows, and we say, strictly speaking, permits evil of whatever kind, whether moral evil, physical evil, any kind of evil that's this falling away from perfection. He permits it to bring good out of it. Mm-hmm. And this is, in a way, it's almost you could call it like the law of the cross, because the cross is the ultimate scandal against this. Right? How could it be that this would be the way that God would reveal and achieve his glory? Surely, you'd think, it's got to be better if Jesus actually wins that day,
right.
like thunderbolts out of his eyes, the Romans die, whatever. He's not crucified. Come on, God, that's a better plan. But somehow, and the cross shows us that God permits this great. He doesn't cause it, right, directly, because God never. There's this absolute divine innocence we could speak of, right? The Father. This is a kind of like the Catholic critique of the Calvinist idea that the Father inflicted his wrath upon his Son, which starts to make you wonder about the Father.
Right.
And the Father doesn't will Jesus to be crucified. We crucified Jesus. But God created a universe in which that can happen. Now, again, when you say perfect universe, God runs it perfectly. He could have created a different universe.
Sure.
He could have created just angels, right? And none of those angels fell. I mean, whatever. But what we don't have is the perspective to say, to judge, to compare one universe to another. So we're always coming up, this just becomes hypothetical. Who knows what a better universe really looks like. But we do know that given the universe God makes, he can't do a bad job in running it, which is to say, and what doesn't he run? Like, what isn't he responsible for in the end, either directly or permissively?
Right.
He's responsible for everything. And we can, and this, I mean, you see this in Scripture, you can sincerely say, like, I'm upset, Lord. Like, why did you let this happen? Like, why did you let this happen to me? Why do you let people do these things? That's one of the beautiful gifts of the prophets, is that they have this dialogue that's very authentic. But God usually doesn't explain himself.
Right.
That's what we see in the Old Testament, right? God's not like, well, actually, let me like lay it out for you what my whole thinking was. This is why I did this. The way that like an errant teenager would try to explain his bad decision to like a parent or something. Why did you crash the car? Well, I was thinking, when we try to ask that, I go, why did you allow this to happen? Right? He gives the answer that he gave to Job, which is, were you there when I created the world? Right? And I measured all this out and did all these things. So if you don't have my perspective, how can you possibly criticize me? And rather, what you should do is know who I am, which is the good God who does only good, and trust that. And that change of perspective will allow you to start seeing things differently. It won't eliminate evil from your perspective, but you will start to see what God sees, what he revealed in his Son, is that evil becomes an opportunity for good. Not because God wants evil, but in a universe in which we and angels bring about evil, God can conquer that evil by transforming it from within, rather than just annihilating it, which he could have done.
Right.
But he doesn't.
Yeah, it makes the sort of deistic mindset, though, kind of tempting, because I think it gives a much neater explanation for evil. It's like, well, why did my friend die? It's like, died at a young age. It's like, well, you can't really answer the question of why God allowed that to happen, but you can just say, well, some idiot, ran his car into her, right? And then that's kind of, it's still suffering and painful and unjust, but you don't have the theological problem of saying, why is God allowing this? Or something that I've been thinking about lately is like, why does God create so many lives that he knows are going to be aborted? And then, you have these amazing Catholic couples who can't conceive. And it's like, well, if you just put that on a deistic perspective of God, and you just say, well, that's just biology, like that's just biology doing what God, the sort of clockmaker designed biology do. But then when you have this view of God that he's like intimately involved in the world, that kind of puts him on trial in a sense. And it enters you into like this wrestling of like, well, why do X but not Y?
Mm-hmm. And I think we have to make sure that we don't rest with a philosophical answer to a fundamentally theological problem. So the philosophical answer is, God allows evil, which is a sort of deficiency of being, because it's greater to have a universe where you have many kinds of being, or wherever grades of being, or God's not responsible for this because he's going to use this for some greater good. I mean, at the end of the day, like, evil isn't an illusion; it's real, and people who experience injustice in their life know this. And God did not make evil; we did, and really, it starts with the devil. But he doesn't just say, "Well, look at how I'm just going to kind of like use this to bring about some good," because that makes God seem like a really terrible person. Like, wait a second, like, so you're using evil to bring good out of it. I thought that's really bad, and we're not supposed to do that. And I think what we learn in Scripture is that God doesn't use us to bring about greater ends, right? Evil is a personal reality. It's demonic and it's human. And God defeats evil in the end. He conquers it. And we have to be careful that we don't lose that answer, that God's solution to all this evil is that he's going to conquer it and transform it and make it new again. And if you don't have that full-blown view of the resurrection and the work that Christ will achieve at the end of time to make all things new again. So, in fact, like, all these things that we thought were broken, were gone, were irreparably harmed, are going to be transformed in a way that we won't see them as having lost anything. But in fact, they'll gain something even greater than they had before. And this is what resurrection means. There's this great, I forget the exact part, but it's in The Great Divorce, and C.S. Lewis is talking about in there about how, from the perspective of heaven, it'll look like every single step we took in our life was a step toward heaven. And we don't get to see that now, and it looks like you talked about, like, my 20s, I was wandering. That's what it felt like, right? But like, in heaven, it's not gonna. I'm gonna be so amazed at the beauty of God's providence and how God was able to not just bring out of, like, use in an instrumental way that makes us question, like, how good God really is, but actually transform all these missteps and deficiencies of mine and others, and fill them up again at the end of time in the new creation. So and I think when you start to see that this is God's plan, to redeem means to get the value back. And God doesn't conquer in a kind of way that says, I beat you and now you're just going to, like, be over there defeated and I'm going to forget about you and kind of move on. God doesn't move on. He changes, and he can, and he has the power to do that. So those things that we may regret, to learn that actually that one day that part of my life is going to be present in everything that it should have been, and even better in heaven, in its actuality. And I'm not actually losing anything. We don't see that in this life, but that's a purely supernatural view, right? That's the revelation of Christ, the message that God defeats evil, that he transforms it, that he brings life out of darkness, versus a message that would just say, well, God permits evil to bring a greater good out of it, so it's going to be okay in the end. And it's this kind of calculus, and we kind of, it's almost like we backdoor into the deist position, that because we don't talk about the devil, we don't talk about sin, we don't talk about Jesus, who came to conquer and not just wipe away, but actually transform and heal us. I mean, I think that still leaves the question of, like, one of the toughest questions in theology is, I mean, aren't we going to be sad about the devil being gone forever, like that. The church has declared this a doctrine, and that the devil's not getting out of hell. Right? There were some in the early church who said even the demons are going to be saved. And the church was like, nope. And so this introduces a kind of problem, like a lot of the medieval theologians would wrestle with. Well, I mean, how is that not a tragedy?
Right.
I mean, Lucifer was this amazing, beautiful creature, and he's lost and gone forever, and all the other demons too, right? They were these amazing, beautiful creatures, and then however many human beings may be going to hell. How is that not a tragedy that somehow like God's plan broke?
Yeah.
And it didn't work out. And there's no easy answer. There's kind of like the roads you can't take, which again, one of the roads you don't want to take to try to answer that question is that God is something less than omnipotent or all-knowing.
Right.
That would make the devil into like another kind of God, like a dualism or something like that. Or that God doesn't even know, like some people, is another philosophical, like he's kind of ignorant of evil. He doesn't even see it, right? Like his hands are covering his eyes, and well, evil's just a privation, so no big deal, right? That's what St. Thomas says. So God just sees degrees of goodness, and you've got a little less goodness than someone else, and you're just getting the good of justice and eternal punishment, right? Which is great, right? And God gives you that goodness. He just doesn't give you the good of glory. And you're like, well, that sounds a little inadequate. Like, no thanks.
Right.
If all I'm getting is the good of eternal punishment in hell that glorifies God's justice, I'd rather have.
I'll take the annihilation.
Yeah, exactly. And so we have to be careful about like the roads we don't want to go down, and we want to make sure we reaffirm the principles, like in any kind of problem, that like God is all good, right? He's this absolute divine innocence. He doesn't ever will evil. He doesn't create. He doesn't predestine to evil. That reprobation is because of us, right? Because we choose evil, and some people in God's perfect plan are not saved, starting with demons, right? And that in some way in heaven, it will not cause us any sadness, and it will not be a tragedy to know that those who are most responsible for evil will get what they deserve, which is divine punishment. Now, that's a whole nother kind of thing we can go down, because people are still debating this today. You've got David Bentley Hart, others who are trying to repropose this idea of universal salvation.
Right.
Other Catholic theologians who've kind of looked at this in a kind of theoretical way. Maybe God's going to save even more. Maybe he can save like everyone. Can we dare to hope that much? Yeah. And that's a kind of interesting question. I think as long as you stay within the lines of orthodoxy, which is freedom's real, and that hell is a real possibility, and no one gets away with anything ever. And that's a big part of what purgatory is, as well as the punishments we suffer, we struggle with in this life, and that. For those who are saved, it's not because they deserved it. It's because God made them good through his grace. I mean, there's all these kind of lines you have to draw. But in the end, what you rest with is that my confidence, my trust, my faith, my hope is in God, who is so good. And so I can hope for salvation for myself, for others. I can, in fact, not just hope for it. I'm actually, I can be a part of their salvation, right? I can intercede and pray for someone, and someone can be saved through my prayers, which you start to realize like the power of prayer, right, and the responsibility God has given us to share in that work. And then, you back away from a question that's really difficult, and you look at ones that are a little more immediate, kind of in some ways more meaningful. Like, what about these mistakes in my life, right? Can this be redeemed? Like, can God heal this? Maybe not in a way that I would like, or I think, would be fixing this, but maybe he's got an even greater way to fix this that I don't know yet, or have to have revealed to me in a different way. And that's where it gets really interesting, because you see that happens all the time.
Oh yeah,
people
absolutely.
Struggle with those things, and when the conversion happens, to know about the God who can make all things new, who brings life out of darkness, and that can happen in these places in my life and in the world, changes your perspective forever, changes your motivation for action forever, because now you have a hope that's not going to disappoint.
Right.
I'm a part of what God's doing, and what he's doing is going to work. I know that he's going to achieve this in the end, that it's going to be glorious, that this new creation, all things will be made new. I want to be a part of that. I can't wait to see what that looks like.
Right. Well, it's almost like, well, two things. It's almost like on the one hand, you can't escape God. You can't escape God's action. Like whatever you do, God's going to work through you, which is comforting. But then also when we bring up the question of like hell and damnation, I mean, to me that puts a greater weight though also on our freedom, like on the flip side, you know, it's like our freedom doesn't matter because God's going to accomplish what he's going to accomplish, but also our freedom so matters because our freedom could lead us to hell. Right.
And just again, if you scale it, you know, down just a little bit, like look at just the things in our life and in our world, you see, like there's a kind of reverence that we have that choices matter.
Yeah.
And people make choices and it affects them the rest of their lives.
Well, I mean, I think that's why it goes back to how we started the conversation with that anxiety about like, you know, what am I supposed to do with my life? Like people realize that their choices matter and that's frightening, you know? But at the same time, like all things work for the good of those who love God, and he can come in and you know, redirect.
Yeah. And if you're choosing good things, you're going to be okay.
Right. But even if you're not, I mean, so I've been listening to this podcast series that's really interesting. It's about the role of the Catholic Church during the AIDS crisis in like the 80s. And it probably would be controversial for some listeners, but one of the figures I was profiled in it was this priest who was a Catholic priest, Jesuit priest, but was himself gay. He didn't have HIV, AIDS, or anything like that, but he dedicated himself to ministering to the predominantly gay men who were dying of AIDS. And the part I was just listening to was talking about how he wrote, he's an artist, so he wrote and he designed these Stations of the Cross that were designed for people who are dying of AIDS to kind of meditate on, and how it's like, you know, Jesus getting his death sentence is from Pilate is like you getting your diagnosis, and all the various like, you know, trials that you're going through is like Jesus, you know, he's getting beaten, he's getting stripped, he's getting, you know, falling under the weight of the cross, etc. And some of the people who were being interviewed, you know, were reflecting on like just praying with those stations and how moving it was to know that God was like even intimately with them in their suffering from HIV/AIDS, you know, this sexually transmitted disease that was affecting gay men. And I thought there's something mysteriously beautiful about that it's like, even if you have somebody who is kind of far from the church and they're, you know, living a lifestyle that does not conform to really the morals of the church, like he still has his hands on them in a sense and can bring them back, even like through the mystery of like the sufferings that they experience through their own choices, you know? It was just, I don't know, something powerful about it.
Absolutely. I think that's a great example of how, you know, that I always think of, it's kind of changed now, but one of my favorite places in the world is the Missionary of Charity's house, Gift of Peace in D.C.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time there over the years and very close to Missionaries of Charity, love St. Teresa of Calcutta. And it's almost like you can't talk about it. You have to see it. To see someone who is really like in Good Friday, like things falling apart, like they're losing hope, like, and it doesn't look good on all these levels. Like they're, their hopes to find love in a human way in this life, to find a life, a career that makes a difference. That all these natural things that we do hope for, and how a disease can shatter all that.
Yeah.
And the loneliness that can bring, everything. To see then how the resurrection, the hope of the resurrection, which is the love of God taken to its utmost kind of realization or effect of, this is how far I'm willing to go, right? To this is how much I love you. God's telling us that I give my son, who gives himself completely, and that love is because of what love is. That love is so great that it defeats everything that is evil and death. That gets a little abstract. To see that all revealed in this intuitive, kind of non-conceptual way, when someone loves someone else, and it's actually Christ in them loving that person in a way that's completely gratuitous. It's not asking for anything. It's not trying to make a deal. It's I love you, because you are loved by the perfect God. And so I love you as Jesus loves you, and I want to reveal this love of Jesus that sees everything lovable that you are, infinitely lovable, since you're loved by an infinite God, and loves you to the point of giving his life for you, not just as a moral example, but actually as this thing that is going to transform everything in your life and make all this new. When you see someone have that experience of being loved and encountering love, sometimes for the first time, a love that's unconditional, that's not asking for something in return, that to me is one of the greatest signs of the truth of the resurrection, not just as an idea, but as something that changes people. And every time Christians love someone who feels themselves to be lost, unlovable, everything's gone, there's no hope left in my life, and they bring that in through love, that's the greatest argument, right, for Christianity.
Well, but it's a mysterious thing, though, because I think there are a lot of non-Christians or maybe non-practicing devout Christians who are able to showcase a tremendous self-sacrificial love. And there's a lot of Christians who are not doing that, who might be in the pews on Sunday saying their prayers. You know, they're not going to do anything, quote unquote, scandalous in the public, but there is not a heart of generosity or a heart of mercy.
And the flip side of that too, right? I mean, it was just recently we heard this in the readings that, for Christians, just actually in the gospel last Sunday, to much has been given, right? Much is expected. And it was in the context of judgment, right, that we heard that verse, that, I'm not doing what this person's doing, right. When well, you don't know what they have gone through, the wounds that have gone back to their childhood, so much that you don't know about their moral development to get to that point to make that decision, and what good they were actually, because we learn this, right, in Catholic moral theology. We're choosing goods, and oftentimes those goods are incomplete or impartial and lacking in some way. But even in sin, right, there's some kind of good we're choosing there. We wouldn't choose it at all. And what about the Christian who's been given every grace and advantage, and all these things, and maybe my kind of bourgeois sin doesn't get right the kind of
fame. Gossiping about my neighbor.
I'm not a gay prostitute,
right?
So I'm fine when my sin is actually far worse than what to me looks like this, notorious sin, which actually there's way more love in that heart.
Yeah,
and I think the church teaches this. God, if God is always involved, like we talked about, it's not like he's treating a bunch of people as non-Christians, and only when they choose to become okay, I guess now I'll operate in a supernatural context with you. Like, he loves them with a supernatural end in mind. Like, he wants them to know him intimately as a friend forever through the gift of his Son and his Spirit. And that, wherever someone is on that journey, they are certainly being prepared for that by supernatural grace.
Sure.
If not already, the church teaches in ways that we can't always see that grace, even in a sanctifying way, may be happening already in their heart.
Right.
So the quote unquote virtuous pagan might be responding to supernatural grace through, and he's not Christian, she's not Christian through no fault of their own, whatever. They've been scandalized by the sins of so many Christians, and they would never become Christian, whatever, but they're actually, a very virtuous, loving person. And there's these Christians who have every advantage who are saying no, and are, they're the ones who deserve the wrath in that parable, and are beaten much worse, right, than those who are beaten, just a little bit.
Well, it's like the Good Samaritan, right? I mean, the Samaritan was not in the proper Jewish circle. They were sort of heretical, and it's the priest, Levitical priest who walks along the other side. And I don't know, I think it's a mystery. I think God is more merciful than we can comprehend. But the flip side of that is that the people who, maybe their sins are not these dramatically wicked things, they almost have a harder time experiencing the mercy of God because they don't feel like they need it in a sense. And so there's sort of this deep mystery of God's mercy where it's you need to realize how much you need it, even if you don't think you need it. And then once you receive it, you have this obligation to then extend it.
That's why, judgment and justice goes along with mercy. I've said this for years, that it was great having the year of mercy and everything, but we need a year of judgment. and to bring back some of those, not just because we're like get those sinners, right? But for us, for all of us to realize that, and it because the same God who is merciful is perfectly just and judges. And judgment primarily means both the word and the theological reality is revealing and unveiling. It's not punishment in the primary sense. Punishment's a part of it, oftentimes for most of us, but judgment clarifies. It makes clear. It says what something is. It reveals the truth about something. And in the spiritual life, the more we grow in wanting to bring every part of our life before that divine clarity, it can be terrifying, right? It's so much better or easier, it seems like, nicer to, not shine that divine light on these parts.
Just close the curtain sometimes. I'll let you.
Well, I don't know. Hopefully you've never said this, but I think any priest who's listening knows, sometimes we get people come to confession and it goes something like this where, I'm basically, I'm a pretty good person and I don't really, do anything bad. And I guess I get angry sometimes. And I mean, your job at that moment isn't to rip them a new whatever and say, oh, really?
Right.
But you certainly do, there's a pain there and a sorrow. I mean, hopefully an intercession for that person, that a lack of self-awareness, because the saints don't talk that way, right?
No.
The saints, I'm basically a good person. I haven't really done anything wrong.
Right.
And we should pity the people who, for whatever reason, are convinced of their own goodness in that way. It's not that other, no one's doing good. It's that we realize how much mercy we need, and how much healing we need, right? How much transformation we and other people need, and how oftentimes the superficial ways that we judge good and evil and what's better and worse are far from God's perspective and reflect more about, like I said, that's what I meant when I said bourgeois. It's not really like the biblical metric. Right. It's some other kind of aesthetic or whatever metric we have that isn't actually the way God sees things at all.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, it's a great way to end this, but I have one more question for you, which is, did I change your mind?
About Maryland?
No.
I love Maryland.
No. So before we start the interview,
I love the weather. I love the storms and the humidity. It's the best.
Yeah. Hey, we're in the AC, so
that's right.
But no. Before we started the interview, you said, I don't really believe in this. Wherever the Spirit's gonna blow. What are we gonna talk about? And I said, don't worry, I have some questions in mind.
That's right.
I didn't ask you a single one of them. So we went where the Spirit blew. We either went where the Spirit.
This totally affirmed my trust in God's providence and perfect plan and ordering of the universe.
Yeah, and that I was right, and that you were wrong. No.
That's fine. I can handle that.
Okay. Wow. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with me. If people want to hear more from you, can you be reached in any capacity?
Sure. They can come to my parish, St. Mary's in Newport. It's only the third oldest Catholic church in the United States. We've been there since 1674, in this beautiful bucolic setting surrounded by farmlands and fields and forests. We have the only shrine of St. John Vianney in the country that was started in 1931. We have a first-class relic, all these miracles been associated with it.
I didn't even know that.
No one does. I'm working.
But I've been to your church many times. Not when you were there, but I was there before you were there.
And you didn't see the relic? It's out there. It's like you just go.
I remember the statue of St. John Vianney, and I'm not gonna lie. I thought it was.
Don't lie to me.
It's a creepy statue to me. He kind of looks like
a lot of people say one eye's merciful and one eye's. I don't know.
No, did you ever watch The Simpsons?
Sure.
He kind of looks like Mr. Burns.
Yeah.
St. John Vianney, saint, no doubt about it. Just the statue's a little. I don't know.
Yeah,
or maybe he wasn't the best looking guy though. I don't know.
Well, it's that early 19th century France. I don't know how.
Yeah, that weird ear length hair. It wasn't a good look.
So they can come to my parish anytime.
But where's the relic?
The relic's in a reliquary right in front of the statue.
I'll be there on Sunday.
Yeah, it's a great place to pray, and so I'm there right now, and that's pretty much where you're going to find me, aside from stuff like this, appearing here and there on podcasts. I used to be active on Twitter, but I kind of stopped that. I feel bad, but
kind of the devil's playground.
Yeah, I know. I just found that it wasn't. I was always trying to do something a little different. Like I would do these long form tweets.
Oh yeah.
And then that became kind of normal, and I stopped doing that because everyone else was doing it, and
Yeah.
so I'm not really on social media
Okay.
that much anymore, but that might change. We'll see. What are we talking about today? I literally have no idea.
Yeah. Where I have a couple things in mind, but we'll see.
You're not one of these. Whatever the Spirit wants you to say, Father Matt.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
What would you like to talk about this evening? Whatever the Spirit says. Like I don't believe in that God. That's